I will call the meeting to order.
Okay, we're good.
All right, I will call the meeting to order. First order is to approve the agenda as presented. I would entertain that motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as presented. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carried. Next item is this 5 school board basics. I'm sorry, I don't have mine up yet, so can I read yours, Jamie? All right, 5 school board basics. Number 1, put students first. Number 2, follow the law and your own policy. Number 3, respect the chain of command. Number 4, base decisions on shared objective information. And number 5, operate in the public eye. All right, moving on to number 3, board training on sunshine laws.
All right, and I must have just hit a button on the thing here, so I lost Siobhan. So hold on just a second.
Let me see it.
There she is. Okay. Siobhan, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, guys.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We're ready for it.
I tried, but I think you did it.
That sounds good. So, because of the setup that we have, I might ask, I really want you guys to be able to ask me questions throughout and stop me, because sometimes I can be a little bit too chatty and go through things kind of quickly. And we have a good amount of ground to cover. So for purposes of this evening, Jamie, if you wouldn't mind just letting me know, because you're closest to the microphone, just let me know if someone has a question and stop me, and then, kind of flag me down and I'll stop so I can answer it, because we have a good amount of ground to cover. But you guys, thanks so much for inviting me to chat with you. I'm Siobhan Schneider with the Iowa Association of School Boards. I'm one of 2 licensed attorneys that are on staff at IASB, and Jamie invited me to come talk to you guys a little bit about the sunshine laws. So we, from time to time, provide some education and training to districts on this very topic. And generally speaking, when we do something like this, we want to just go straight from the source. So I'm going to be utilizing the Iowa Public Information Board's PowerPoint on the sunshine laws. So we're using their training tonight. There's a good amount to cover, but please, like I said, stop me if you have questions as we go along, okay? The purpose of tonight's discussion is really to just kind of refamiliarize you guys with some of the requirements from the open meetings law, and also public records requirements. And then a little bit about the structure of the Iowa Public Information Board and how it works as a state agency. So with that being said, there are some very inspirational quotes from some of our nation's founders, and they all relate to being open with your community, and that's where trust in our government and our government serving our people truly comes from. So it's a wonderful sentiment, and I think it's important. So one thing to kind of keep in mind to frame tonight's discussion, because we're going to cover a bunch of little sort of subparts here, is really truly that if there's ever a question, if you're not sure whether or not something should be done in the open, conducted in the open by your by the district, err on the side of okay? That's where we want things to live, generally speaking. And we'll talk about a couple of notable exceptions to that further on, but for our purposes, just err on the side of conducting things in the open. So the open meetings law and public records laws were first enacted in the late 60s, and they were adjusted in the 70s. And then fast forward several years, because previously, until 2012, if a member of the public worried that a governmental subdivision, like a school district, had inadvertently violated the open meetings law or the public records law, their only recourse was through the court system, and that takes a while. And it can be kind of expensive. So in 2012, the legislature took a little bit of their rulemaking power and they used it to create a state agency. And that state agency is the Iowa Public Information Board. And so IPIB's goal is to try and help resolve disputes early and in a more efficient manner. And one of the other big goals that it has is when a dispute comes up. So a member of the public says, hey, you guys didn't quite, governmental subdivision, you didn't quite hit the mark on providing enough notice or providing the public records I requested. IPIB tries to work with that governmental entity to provide education and training so that they can better comply with the law. So we're going to start with open meetings, and we'll talk a little bit about who's covered under the open meetings law, what's a meeting, and how do you provide notice and what should be included in your minutes. And then we'll talk about, because that's all the work that the district will do, that's your notice. The work that the district is doing, that's the meeting, like the one taking place right now. And then after that, we'll talk about public records, the work that your district has done, okay? All of these things should generally be accessible to your public. So, a governmental entity is a subdivision of the state in some fashion. It could be a state agency like IPIB. IPIB is actually subject to the open meetings law and the public records law. Or it could be a school district. So for our purposes, we're talking about it from the purview of a school district. And that's enacted by our legislature. The state legislature a long time ago decided that school districts were an important governmental subdivision for our state to have, so it created them. So we are subject to the open meetings law, districts are. Now, this is a question that comes up from time to time, and it's been litigated, so there have been many questions on it, but what about subcommittees? These could be ad hoc committees, so committees that are assigned to just fulfill one particular task, or it could be a standing committee of school districts, or even a committee that maybe is created by your superintendent, okay? Where are they in this mix? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the amount of authority that committee has. What's their charge? Are they able to make recommendations about something that's within the board's policymaking duties and have a reasonable expectation those recommendations can be followed? Well, they might be subject to the open meetings law and the public records law. And I'm saying might because, I'm a lawyer, so you ask me a yes or no question, I'm going to give you 50 words to answer it. Because, of course, there are occasionally exceptions. But generally speaking, remember how we started this discussion, which is err on the side of openness. If you have subcommittees, best practice would be generally to consider them part of the open meetings law. Of course, there's always there can always be some notable exceptions, but by and large, you want them to be providing notice of their meetings and also making sure that the records that they produce are accessible to the public. Okay. And we kind of talked about that slide right here. So a meeting, in its simplest terms, is any time a majority of your board has gathered either in person or electronically, and you're discussing something or acting on something that's within your policymaking duties. Now, policymaking duties as a term does not just mean what school districts use in terms of board policy. It's not just writing policies. It's anything that you guys would normally have governance over within the district. If you're having a substantive discussion, then probably, and there's a majority of you, probably you are having a meeting. Okay, so you just want to be aware of that. Can board members gather socially? Sure, absolutely. What I will tell you about this is if you guys want to hang out and, you know, all sit down to Thanksgiving dinner together, you can absolutely do that. This is Iowa, it's a small state. You could probably sit down at Thanksgiving dinner and have a quorum in some communities. With that being said, you just want to make sure that the one thing you all have in common, which is the district, isn't being discussed. The other important consideration is always be cognizant of, even if you guys know you are following the rules, how does this look to your public, right? Because you want to be transparent as possible. So if your board members and you're sitting all together, huddled together at a football game, does that look like there's a likelihood that you're discussing district business? Okay, would it be wise to separate yourselves a little bit? Things like that. Okay, so just kind of some practical considerations. Can you email each other or text? Yeah, you can. However, if it relates to the substance of your policy-making duties, then chances are good you're having an open meeting, or at least you're potentially getting close to a walking forum. So, for instance, it's snowing here in the metro right now. So if we were texting and I said, guys, I can't make it up there. I'm so sorry. You know, it's the roads are hazardous and I just can't show up in person tonight. And I'm texting all of you simultaneously. You're probably fine, because we're not talking about the substance of your policy-making duties. This is an administrative, you know, maybe we need to reschedule the meeting or figure out a different format. If, however, you guys are texting about the bids to provide new turf for your football stadium, probably that's within the substance of your policy-making duties, okay? If you see that difference there. So you want to be conscious of that. So some best practices for electronic communication, really just consider that administrative texts, I'm running 5 minutes late to the meeting tonight, those are fine, but you want to limit them to not being the substance of what you're going to be covering in a typical meeting, right, or a work session. And also just always be cognizant or aware that when you create a public record, it doesn't make a hill of beans difference if it is in the form of a formalized letter or an email or a text message. It's still a record. What matters is the substance, okay? So if the substance relates to your policymaking duties within the district, then there's a decent likelihood that you have created a public record in whatever format it lives in, okay? So you just need to be aware of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So, coming back to meetings, does your public have a right to speak at meetings? Not necessarily. Your board meetings are a meeting that takes place in the public, but it's not a meeting for the public or where there's an absolute right to interact. One thing to be kind of aware of, because while I'm using Iowa Public Information Board's excellent PowerPoint here, it is it's just maybe a few years old. So one caveat I would put on there is House File 868, which passed a couple of sessions ago. And that is the one that requires, it's Iowa Code Section 279.8B. It's the one that requires districts to place an item on the agenda if a petition has been filed in the district. That would be the one asterisk that I would put on this, is that if you were to have a petition like that filed in your district, just be aware then in that situation that you have a legal obligation to ensure that any community members that come and want to speak on that agenda item have an opportunity to speak. And there are some additional rules and limitations to that I won't get into tonight, but if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me after this, and I'm more than happy to answer questions on that, okay? So, let's talk a little bit about your agenda and your notice requirements. So the work you will do, right? So we know that the agenda has to be posted, physically posted, at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting. Physical posting requirement. This should be at in a spot that is central to the district, so typically like a central administration office that's accessible to the public. And one additional consideration that the Iowa Public Information Board added in more recently to communities as a result of the pandemic is because during the pandemic a lot of buildings were closed for periods of time. They said, hey, keep in mind that if you have a building that's closed and you post a notice inside of it, your public should still be able to see it when the building's physically locked. So that means maybe put it in the front. If you have a glass door, put it up against the glass, or post it on the outside of the building, of the door too, so that when the building is physically locked, any member of the public can come up and see what the agenda is. It's just a best practice consideration for you guys. It's always a bonus if you put your post your agenda to your district's website, because so many people use websites, but that's actually not a legal requirement right now. Right now, what's the legal requirement is the physical posting of it, the paper agenda. So obviously you also have to email a copy of your agenda to any members of your community who have filed a request with you to be notified of a meeting in advance. You also have to provide that. And then we talked about the 24 hours requirement. So what has to be in an agenda? In an agenda. This is really pretty interesting. So you have to have enough information that your public reasonably understands the work that you're going to do. So all the basics need to be there. The date, time, and location of the meeting, okay? And then you need enough information on your agenda items for an average member of the public to understand what topic generally will be discussed. And what I tend to tell districts when they have questions about this, and board secretaries who call and ask me about it, is the education community loves acronyms. And we're great at acronyms. We have acronyms for everything. But just be cautious and mindful that they're not making their way onto your agenda if you can avoid it. Or if you do provide an acronym, spell it out too. So if you're if you're going to get a report from your SIAC, I would also write out this is the School Improvement Advisory Committee, just so that a reasonable member of your public who may not be as familiar with education terms or lingo will understand what generally will be discussed. This is a balancing act in terms of how much information you put on an agenda, because you also don't want to provide such detailed information that you kind of close the door on having a healthy discussion about something. So if you have a question about agenda construction or how much information to include on an item, you guys can always reach out to me. This is why I'm a resource available to you guys to answer questions. I'm more than happy to do that. You can also contact your school district legal counsel too if you have a question about how to phrase something on an agenda. If you're talking about a particular staff transition, then generally speaking, we tend to tell folks that it can be useful to have the job title for the position that you're talking about that transition for, okay? And that's typically sufficient so that your community understands, oh yeah, we're talking about the retirement of our communications director or something along those lines, okay? So now we're going to talk a little bit about how do we show the work that we're doing. These are your minutes, okay? Minutes have to show at a bare minimum the where and the when of the meetings, when it took place. So date, time, location, any action that took place, and the members that were present. And now here's the big thing. You also have to show how each member votes, okay? So it's okay to say, motion carried 3-2, nays Smith-Miller, okay? So then your community members can understand that 2 board members, and they can identify which ones voted against a motion, and the other 3 board members voted for it, okay? That's an important piece of the minutes. The other thing that sometimes we hear districts doing, and this comes up around this time every year, because it's usually when districts will transition their district officers. And we hear from board members that want to be able to use like a secret ballot to vote for officers, because it can be an awkward discussion to decide, who you want to nominate or have as appoint as president or things like that. And so what we tend to advise is there's no true secret ballot when it comes to the open meetings law, because during the meeting itself, your community has to be able to hear and know how each member voted on each thing. So that means if a district wants to use a written ballot, then the board secretary should still ideally read off the results and attribute each vote to each board member, if that makes sense. Okay, and then of course that still has to be recorded in the minutes. So again, just another best practice. Because of that, that's why I say there is no real secret ballot, because you can't have that be a secret. We just talked about this one, no secret ballot. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on closed sessions. There are 12 reasons you can go into a closed session. In order to get into a closed session, you need a 2/3 affirmative vote by the entire governmental body. If any members are absent, then it has to be a unanimous vote to enter into the closed session. So there are 12 reasons for going into a closed session. Some of them you will use more frequently than others. The ones that you'll probably see a little bit more regularly might relate to things like evaluating the professional competency of an individual. So if you want to have an evaluation of your superintendent, or to discuss the purchase or sale of real estate, and that discussion could actually affect the price of the real estate. It has to be a particular piece of real estate. That can be a closed session. To discuss records that are required by law to be kept confidential. That one, of course, comes up with some regularity because your emergency operations plan for your district, and that would be considered an opportunity to have a closed session, right? Because that's required by law to be kept confidential. Same thing actually with any cybersecurity plan that you have in place. You guys can discuss that in closed session for the same reason. Because if you have that discussion in the open, well, then everybody can hear it. So these are kind of the more frequent reasons or bases for that districts will typically go to for having closed sessions, okay? To discuss whether or not to have a hearing to suspend or expel a student, obviously would be another one. And I think I'm gonna leave it at that simply because hopefully you don't have to worry about disclosing specific law enforcement matters too often. I mean, some of these are, not specific to school districts, but you'll run across them rarely. Here's what I will tell you, kind of my key tips for closed sessions. Generally speaking, you should have, if you're discussing a person, one person per session, okay? So if you have multiple people to discuss, then probably you're looking at multiple closed sessions, and you can do them back to back. Now, I say generally and probably because there are actually certain circumstances that are an exception to that. And for that, I would ask you guys to touch base with your legal counsel because they can guide you as to which section of the code that you cite to for your closed session. The other big thing I would say that, we're all human and we do our best, but sometimes it happens, is try your best. You really can't stray from the topic that's listed, because in order to have that closed session properly, you need to cite to the specific code section and use that language from the code section on your agenda so that your public understands what the basis for the closed session is, okay? And then you guys collectively as a group have to police yourselves to try and make sure that you're not straying from that topic during the closed session, okay? So we kind of talked about this. There should be a recording, digital, I'm assuming it's not tape recorded, but maybe that is still relevant, or digital recording made of the closed session. And there also have to be detailed minutes. And I will tell you as a best practice, because I've talked with Margaret Johnson, she's the executive director at IPIB, a few times on this, and it's something that's near and dear to her heart. She says, gosh, Siobhan, you know, when I have to go listen to those recordings, all it takes is one sneeze or a cough, and then I can't hear who spoke. And it can be hard to hear those recordings pretty well. So one thing to keep in mind is the minutes are particularly valuable. So make sure that they're being adequately taken. And I would just remind boards, because sometimes, you know, the board has absolute discretion as to who can go into the closed session. And there might be circumstances where the board decides they don't want the board secretary to take the minutes and do the recording. Well, that's fine, but that means that somebody on your board has to serve in that role during the session. You gotta make sure they're doing a good, thorough job of taking those minutes, okay? And then you seal them afterwards. And then of course, no action is taken in a closed session. So any votes relating to the substance of what was discussed take place in the open. And I'm going to pause there because we're getting to towards the end of the open meetings section, and see, does anybody have any questions about what I've kind of discussed so far?
No.
Doing well. Okay, so we're going to keep going. There really isn't too much in the law in chapter 21 itself that requires you to have a closed session. So again, if in doubt, err on the side of openness. Of course, we have other laws and considerations that you might want to keep in the back of your mind, things like HIPAA that protects medical records for employees and things like that. But for chapter 21 purposes, err on the side of openness. So let's talk a little bit about records. So records, very broadly, are any type of record, digital, paper, what have you, that are created, cared for, or maintained by the district, okay? So it doesn't necessarily have to be created by the district, it can be received by the district. These are public records, okay? The district has a legal obligation to serve as a custodian for those records and to properly care for them and dispose of them. And we'll talk about that too. Who has a right to examine public records? Anybody. They don't have to just be a member of your community. They could, they could live in Washington State and request records and still receive public records from your school district, okay? So records have to be made available during your customary office hours, but IPIB says generally at a minimum, you have to make available that someone can come in and examine your school district records between 9 and noon and 1 and 4, Monday through Friday. Obviously with exceptions during holidays when the district is closed. So that part of it is usually not an issue for school districts because you have offices and because our school year is pretty well regimented in terms of what our school calendar looks like. The biggest part of chapter 22, which is our public records law, is the exceptions. It's the confidential records, the records that are accepted from disclosure. Okay, and that's chapter 22, subsection 7. There are very many of them. I think there's over 75 different subcategories. So I am not going to name them all for you guys because that wouldn't be a meaningful use of your time tonight. But here's what you should generally know as a board. Information that we as a society generally say should probably be safeguarded. Now this is, for example, information about children, our student records, right? Information about medical records, either for students or employees. Information about employee personnel files, some notable exceptions here. Generally speaking, these are going to be exceptions to what has to be disclosed as a public record, because as a society we say, yeah, people do have some privacy rights, okay, and we want to be respectful of that. So those are probably going to be exceptions to the public records requirements and having to turn those over. But again, like I said, there are very many of them. There's actually over 70. So if you ever have a question about what constitutes a confidential record, you can feel free to email me or give me a call, and I'm more than happy to look it up. And obviously your school board attorney will know that information as well. With that being said, what I will tell you is when it comes to a public record, if you're not sure, that's a call your attorney moment, okay? For your district administrative team. If you're not sure about a record, or you think some of the information is public, but maybe some of it isn't, that's definitely a great time to contact your legal counsel and ask them to take a look at it, because they can offer an opinion on it and also spend time redacting the document as needed, okay? Couple of things here. In 2011, the legislature kind of expanded that personnel file so that the public can know, information related to wages for different, for public employees, and also that they were discharged as a result of disciplinary action. And I will say, because this, again, this excellent PowerPoint is just a few years old, it doesn't fully capture that. They made another adjustment in 2017 that also allows districts to disclose information on employees that resigned in lieu of termination, okay? And some information about their disciplinary record as it might be pertinent, okay? So sometimes you will have, hopefully rarely, a situation where the district is required by law to turn over records. And again, you're going to work with your legal counsel when you get a subpoena or a court order or anything like that that directs you to turn over records, okay? So what I will tell you about confidential records is, again, the best practice you can have is working early and often with your legal counsel if you're not sure whether or not a record should be exempt from being turned over. But one of the areas where people fall into, or districts can kind of have a little bit of trouble, is how much time do you have to respond to the records request? And this one's actually pretty clearly laid out. You should be responding within 10 days, maybe 20 days if it's particularly complex. But when I say respond, I don't mean handing over all the documents requested in 10 to 20 days. I mean talk with the person, okay? Let them know, hey, I received your request. And boy, this is a great request, but you want every record the district has that includes the word student for the last 10 years. And that's probably over 1 million records. So that would cost tens of thousands of dollars in our time and our attorney's time to consider what we have to redact. If what you're really asking for, community member, is a record of the disbursements from the Student Activity Fund in the last 18 months, we can probably get that to you by the end of the week. These are good conversations to have, and have them early, so that your community members that are requesting the records, they understand, oh, okay, maybe I need to narrow down my request. Because oftentimes, districts will get requests in that are just really, really broad because they're trying to, cast a wide net, understandable. But when they have a better idea of, this is gonna be a longer timeline, and this might be quite expensive if you're wanting copies, then that can help provide a reasonable incentive to try for the district and the community member to work together to try and get the information that they truly need, okay? Records held on separate databases, while you don't have to provide full access to the database because that might be proprietary information, having a record on an external database that the district still has care and control of, that alone is not a legitimate reason for not turning over the record. So you still have to be able to produce it, okay? If you have care and control of the record and or it was created by you, then yeah, you probably have to produce it. we talked a little bit about fees, but here are some kind of best practices to keep in mind. Talking with your community members when they make a records request, letting them know ahead of time, hey, there might be a fee associated with this if you're wanting copies. If you'd like instead to come in and view the record, probably there's no fee, depending on the complexity of the situation. It's nice to have those conversations up front and let your community members know. Some districts even provide written documentation when someone wants to file a records request. So they'll fill out a form and file a records request, and on the form they'll provide information to the community member that says, hey, just want to let you know, here's our policy for copying records, and all of the reasonable standards for being able to supply those records or view them versus copying. One thing to keep in mind, this most recent legislative session that ended in the spring of 22 did result in an additional change to Chapter 22. And what it said basically is for governmental subdivisions, school districts included, you should make every effort to provide documents that were requested by your community at no cost if you can fulfill that request in like 30 minutes or less. So if this is a really simple, straightforward matter, do the best you can to simply provide those copies and not have to, bill your community member. But for more complex issues, just be honest with whomever is making the request about what your fees are. The fees have to be reasonable. They have to be necessary, and you can't charge for things like the light bill for the time that the person is fulfilling the records request. Anything that's a bit of a stretch shouldn't be charged. So we talked a little bit about that. I mentioned this before, but if you have information that needs to be redacted, so you have a document that probably 90% of it is good to go, you can produce it, but 10% might have, let's say, protected student information on there. Then that's a great opportunity for your school district legal counsel to go ahead and redact it appropriately for you, and then you still provide it, because you do have a legal obligation to provide the document if by and large it's subject to being produced, but you just might have to take out some information. You also can't pass the cost of doing kind of specialty manipulation of the document onto the requester. What I mean there is, if you have to send it to your attorney to redact, then yes, you can charge the reasonable attorney's fees for that redaction. But if you want to add it into a PowerPoint and make a laser light show out of it, you're not charging that to the person. Okay? Has to be reasonable. So best practice for governmental entities is to have a policy in place that goes through how people can access your records and how they can make a request and what records you keep and for how long, okay? And maybe also what's protected, what you're not going to turn over. Good news is you guys have many of these. So you have a nice healthy range of policies. They align largely with IASB sample policies, but you have your policy 708, which is the care and disposal of district records. You also have policy 901, which is your public examination of district records. You have policies in the 200 series for the board of directors records, 400 series for employee records, and the 500 series for student records. So you guys are pretty well covered in being able to proactively tell your community, here's the information that we can share with you openly. Here's the information that we might safeguard, like personally identifiable information about students, and here's how you can get the information. Okay, so you guys have that in place, which is great. I'm just scrolling through here to make sure I'm covering the topics that IPED has here, and we're just about done. So one thing to keep in mind, we talked about being able to store your information on databases. But one thing to also remember when we're talking about public records is Chapter 22 of the Iowa Code is not the only law that the district needs to be aware of. You do still have some competing federal laws that you want to keep in the back of your mind. I mentioned HIPAA, medical records, right, for an employee or for a student. I mentioned FERPA related records, so the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which governs protecting information on students. And then there's also another big one that districts should be aware of, and oftentimes school districts do a great job of remembering this one, but it's the copyright laws that we have in place, okay? You have to be cautious about what records you're copying if it's not a record that the district actually owns. So this might relate to curriculum or instructional materials that are used. That's not to say that you can't copy those and make them available to people who ask. You just have to make sure that you're following our federal laws in how you copy it and how you make that available. And a great resource if you have questions on that, generally speaking, and I hate to put one person on the hook for this, but usually your school librarians are pretty well versed in copyright laws and how they work in your district. So if you guys have questions, that might be a nice person to hear from in terms of resource. But of course, your school attorney is very well versed in copyright protections and fair use doctrine, and also educational use doctrine. So if you have questions about that, that'd be a great resource to go to as well. So a little bit about penalties for violating the law. I started this by talking about the fact that IPIB actually really wants to just educate governmental subdivisions and who act in good faith, but sometimes kind of miss the mark. And that's what they hope to do. But if there is an infraction there, then IPIB as a state agency does have the authority to issue some penalties. These can be relatively modest, starting at $100 to $500. And when I say penalties, I don't mean that the district would be on the hook for paying this. I mean individual board members would, because you're the publicly elected officials, okay? So it's not your district that would be paying these, it would be you guys. Up to $2,500 for a knowing willful violation, okay? And there are some potential other penalties that could be tacked on there, but basically if the district is acting in good faith and they make a mistake, and you work with IPIB and you're proactive about it, they try really hard to just provide education and training, okay? So a little bit about IPIB. We talked about it being created in 2012, and it really was designed to be an alternative to a formal court process. So the Iowa Public Information Board is run by an executive director who's appointed, and there are 9 board members on IPIB appointed by the governor. And their job is to hear formal complaints and dispose of matters, provide formal dispositions to matters that have the force and effect of law, those formal opinions. It's an independent state agency, and they have the same powers as other state agencies. So that means that they can issue formal opinions, they can give informal guidance. I was actually just on the phone with Margaret Johnson, their executive director, earlier this week, asking a question about another matter. I find IPIB to be particularly good and responsive when people have questions. Hey, we're not sure about this. This is how we'd like to structure something. Is that okay? And they'll usually give me some good feedback and good tips to consider and going forward. So I would say reach out to them early and often if you have questions, but they also will investigate complaints, and they can issue those formal findings and declaratory orders as needed. They can prosecute as well, which is where the fines come in, and anything else, any other penalties related to infractions. But again, they do prefer to go the route, generally speaking, of training and education when governmental entities make good faith mistakes. And I will tell you, in the grand scheme of nobody is above the law, IPIP themselves have made a mistake or two. And so they have to go through the process as well. So nobody is perfect. Everybody is working really hard to do what they can to stay, to make sure that they are fully compliant with the law. But the real big kicker or key here is just acting in good faith, okay? And ask questions if you ever have questions. But generally speaking, complaints for IPIP have to be lodged within 60 days. Otherwise, there is a court process that could be utilized if it's more remote. So again, some additional background information on IPIP and how they function. And of course, who's allowed to make a complaint? Really pretty much anybody in your community can make a complaint, okay? So recapping everything, err on the side of openness. If you're not sure about something, ask a question. Make sure you're getting some good, clear guidance. And when in doubt, err on the side of openness. Keep it open, give notice, tell people what you're gonna do the work you're gonna do in the open, and then make a nice, clear record of the work that you did and maintain it. So there's some additional resources at the end of this, and I'm gonna skip through these. But I think that pretty much covers everything in terms of open meetings and public records. Let me ask one more time. I'm just going to pause. Does anybody have any questions? Is there something you heard where you're not sure about or you want to hear a little more information about?
I do have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Siobhan, this is Kyle Grimes. Do you have to have a motion to come out of closed session?
This is a hotly debated topic, and actually at our annual convention we had a board secretaries workshop, and this was contested among board secretaries across the state. Let me tell you, I will tell you that attorneys are of two minds. Some attorneys are totally fine with districts or boards having a motion to come out of the closed session, and then other attorneys will say no voting means no voting. So I would say it's probably fine regardless of what you're doing. What you absolutely can't do is vote on anything related to the substance of the discussion in a closed session. So I would tell you, and please understand, Kyle, that I have because I try to give guidance to all districts across the state, my guidance tends to be about as conservative as it can get in terms of protecting the district. Best practice in my mind is you don't vote. You just say, has the conversation, have we kind of reached an end to the conversation? Okay, everybody's ready to head back into open? All right, let's go. But again, I know there are many very fine attorneys that represent school districts across the state that are completely comfortable with boards choosing to vote to come out of closed session.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, guys?
I don't believe so.
All right, well, thank you so much. And you guys take care and try and stay warm.
Thanks, Siobhan. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
All right, moving on to item 4, the consent agenda items. We do have some additional bills that Kendra handed out.
For the most part, the bigger items on this list were for SU insurance, is our equipment breakdown insurance, and that extra premium is for our copiers that we added. There's several scholarships being paid this month, and then also the Mintex is all the FFA fruit sales, the bill for those. Otherwise, they're all pretty straightforward things. Somebody have questions?
All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda items. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carried. Moving on to item 5, visitors, public forum. We do have one request to speak. Tom Taylor, representing parents. Subject is board items.
Well, hello again, everybody. I'll make this quick. I know everybody has a lot to do tonight. Some of the things that I've been coming across, working with some past teachers and current teachers in this district, we have an unneeded amount of staff turnover. I filed 6 complaints on behalf of current past staff members and looking at filing 2 more next week in references to the way they were let go. The findings that I have and all the stories are the same, that Mr. Craig had disagreements with staff members and he either asked them to resign or they could be fired. Per my conversations with the Ethics Committee, I'm asking the board to look into these resignations and firings, to have maybe a committee of 2 board members reach out. There's a strong chance the Ethics Committee later this year is gonna ask our board to do this anyway. So I'm trying to cut it off a little bit early, so maybe providing a board reaching out to these staff members, and other staff members that I have not talked to. With that, the 2 board members, I'd ask that Kyle Grimes not be on that. I think he's shown that he's been an unethical person on this board, and I've stated that many times, and I don't think he'd produce it with an unbiased opinion back to the board, and I think your findings should be brought back to the board in a public meeting. We also need to make sure that our superintendent has been doing his job properly. One of the concerns that some of our parents have had that they brought to me is that we're making proper notes for our district, so we do not end up in a situation where we're held liable for hiding or being neglectful for later lawsuits that might be filed against our district because we didn't make the proper notes or documentation on his record. Next, I'd like the board to look at taking full control of all situations, and what I mean is why we are dependent on our superintendent president to talk and relay the information to you. I believe you should be all involved in the decisions, not just ones that are brought to your attention. I'm asking the board to make an amendment to your policies that the superintendent works with all the board members and we vote on everything pertinent to our school district, not just certain items. An example of this, in fact, would be we're live streaming and putting it on YouTube, which I think is a great idea. It makes it great for the district. But how did we come to this decision? Did the board vote on it? Did the board know it was going to happen? Did the public know? No, it's a decision that was made and nobody was made aware of it and there was no decisions made. Great idea, should have been done years ago, but it's simple things like this that make the board and our superintendent look really bad. It's something that would be passed, it would be something that would be easily done, but we decided just to do it and it's a change to how you guys are doing the meetings. So it should be something that should be voted on. Lastly, I'd like to revisit our MAP policy. I think we have individuals that are in our district that would be good board members. We're a small district, and our community map makes really no sense. I think it should be changed to where maybe we have one from Sibley, one for Ocheyedan, and then the other 3 board members can be within any district or rural areas. I don't know why we have to have specific areas. We're 3,000 people in Sibley, 1,000 people maybe in Ocheyedan. We're not a huge district. I think we should really think about opening that back up.
Okay, thank you. I don't believe there are any other public forum. Moving on to administrative reports. Principals, Mr. DeZale.
Yeah, so as stated in the report, we're attempting to, minus the weather delays and stuff out of our control, but trying to put the finishing touches on our first semester. Not near as big of a deal at the younger levels, simply because of the continuation of learning that happens throughout the entire school year at the younger levels than it is at the secondary level, but trying to wrap that up and make sure that our instruction and the kids are ready to go to break. We are planning for our winter assessments so that we can decide, is our instruction meeting the needs of our kids, our fast and our fast reading tests and our iReady math test specifically. and looking at what would be the best opportunity and give our kids the best chance for success there. And our teachers are kind of gaining more comfort with that. The new Amplify curriculum that was approved last year that we're implementing this year as they work through this first year of implementation. For PD, the last month, it's been mainly our in-house mentoring time, which I cannot stress to the board enough has been such a great use of that program. It's just been, with the sub shortages and some of those kind of things, it's been kind of a godsend, to be completely honest with you, that program. And the way that Lindsay and Katie have set it up, I think I've heard good feedback from our participants in there as well. So we also continue to use the time to familiarize ourselves with the curriculum, to meet in teacher teams and have common planning time, and then also have discussions on individualizing our instruction in our classrooms. And we'll hopefully continue to move in that direction here second semester as we kind of individualize our PD and model that for the teachers. So. And then the bottom part of the report is the attendance per the board goals. So.
All right, any comments, questions? All right, thank you. Secondary principal, Mr. DeZale.
So, I won't rehash everything on there, but the end of the semester is on us, and it's been kind of a challenge to wrap things up with all the recent snow days and everything, and making the adjustments, not only class instruction, but when you start getting to the high school level, all the activities that go along with it. And so I was going to call out Amy Elser for her hard work and reshuffling and planning. Tonight's a great example because on a night we were going to have a middle school concert. We had bad weather, and so that had to get rescheduled tonight, and you back up the high school concert and move the time ahead. And so that takes a lot of planning and coordination. That's just one event, so I want to thank you for that. And we're trying to make plans to end the semester, and then if we looked at the 10-day forecast, it's not great for the end of this week, so we'll be as flexible as we can with that and do the best we can with it, but I appreciate our staff with that. With the interventions and the credit recovery classes, I just wanted to reiterate that it's been a big improvement in how that process is run, and the things that we could do to better support our students and set that up. Laurel's been a great support subbing for Jillian, so she's got to see some of that firsthand while our guidance counselor's out of maternity leave, so I appreciate that. Specific to the interventions, one of the things that I wanted to point out, if you look at the supporting document there, the attachment that Emma shared with me for our interventionist in the middle school, the thing that I wanted to jump to at the bottom in the yellow box, if you've opened it and you haven't, but it says percentage of students exited. So in the middle school, those that have been meeting with her that have scored high enough that they don't need assistance basically anymore, so they're not getting anything, that 22% of the students that she had met with this year have exited. So I just wanted to point that out, that that's a good thing. Those are kids previously without her position wouldn't have been receiving services, so I'm kind of excited about that. And as another example of how our staff's willing to work together and to go above and beyond with that intervention, and Kent talked about that with the fast testing, we do what's called the initial fall screener right when we come. The winter screener is in the beginning of January. When that's happening at the middle school, instead of doing some interventions during that time, we're just going to do the screening. And so Emma came up with the idea, now that we're going to be fully staffed at the middle school, so we're going to have Tyler be math full-time, Heather's going to go full days, Heather Klein-Waltering. So she's like, can I team teach with her the first week so we can get started with some of the new, because Heather hasn't worked with the new Amplify curriculum that the other staff had training on in May, that she's had some training on. So she goes, if we just get started and team teach on that, and those two came up with that idea themselves, basically had the schedule and the plan to work it out, and basically we're just looking for a yes. And I'm like, of course, why wouldn't we do that? So, I'm just really thankful for our staff who just, that's something they didn't have to do, but they were willing to do and worked it out. So I thought that was really cool. So that and yeah, the attendance is there as well.
All right. Any questions, comments for Mr. DeZale? All right, thank you. Moving on to Mr. Craig.
In addition to my report that's on the agenda, I'd like to thank Tony for his work tonight to get the live stream set up for our online audience, and also the 7th and 8th grade teachers who put together the effort and sacrifice that it took to pull off what they did first semester. They've done a tremendous job. It's led to new curriculum ideas that'll be beneficial for our students in the future, a great deal of collaboration with a lot of outside resources. And they pushed the kids forward and left it better than they found it. And I don't think we could have asked any more of them during this first semester. So to reiterate what Mr. DeZeo said, that's just great that we have the teachers to be able to move that forward. So that's all I have.
All right. Any comments, questions from Mr. Craig? All right, thank you. Board committees, policy, finance, and facilities.
Finance committee is going to need to start meeting regularly after the break so that we can start on negotiations and budget planning. And it'll be a new year for the policy committee as well, but they have all year to cover their board series that they have to review.
All right, moving on to recognition of excellence.
Ava's not with us. We hope she's going to come back in January. Madison Brower became the all-time school record holder for rebounds total over her career as a high school girls basketball player, and broke the school record for most rebounds in a game with 20. That's quite an accomplishment, as rebounding is one of the toughest skills as you get down in there and have to fight for the ball. It takes a lot of talent to not only get the rebound, but be able to be in position and fight off the defense. So congratulations to Madison. Michael Block became the school record holder for fastest pin in wrestling at 5 seconds. That's also quite the accomplishment to grab your opponent and secure the pin and just done just like that. I've seen that one other time when I was in college, and it's amazing to see it happen. So congratulations to Michael. Also, Ryan Wiersma was voted an at-large Class 1A cross-country coach of the year, and we're very proud of Mr. Wiersma and what he's done for our kids. So congratulations to all those mentioned.
All right, thank you. Moving on to IASB update. I'm completing my last week and a half on the board. What they are working on steadily right now is the process of searching for a new executive director. When you were all down there, Lisa Bartusek is retiring in the end of June, I believe. So IASB has hired a search firm, and they are in the process of going through kind of the same thing that we are. So that's taking up a lot of their time right now, and they'll hit that hard after the first of the year. Moving on to discussion items, review of the levy expirations.
So we do this on a yearly basis. The instructional support levy is good until 2024, so that is just under 2 years away. So it's time to start looking at that and getting it renewed. These levies you can renew immediately at any time, or you can renew them on a vote to take effect after the current levy expires. So for example, I'll mention that you approve the physical plant equipment levy annually. That's the 34 cents that we start off with. The voted PEPAL has a 10-year duration, is good until 2026. So for example, if you wanted to be able to borrow for projects and wanted to be able to say you would have cash further down the road, you could put that on the next election to take effect after the current levy expires. So you wouldn't lose the 2 years or 3 years of time between now and when the current levy expires by moving your 10 years up. So you could still get the last 3 years plus have that next 10 years. And then SAVE was extended to 2050. So both the instructional support levy and the voted PEPAL you'll want to start considering very soon, because you'll have projects that you'll want to do into the future, and if that voted PEPAL goes away, you're going to lose 67 cents worth of income to be able to do PEPAL projects, and that's a significant amount of money. And you can also approve it up to $1. So things to consider. But
Appreciate that.
That's the review.
All right. Moving on to new business, consider approval of IPIB complaint informal resolution.
So the informal resolution was attached to the agenda, and part of the informal resolution was to go through that training tonight with Siobhan. So the rest of it, the two other things that we have to do is approve the resolution at the board meeting, and as part of that, we're admitting that a vague agenda item was posted on a board agenda. So Tom has agreed to the informal resolution as the complainant, and so in order for it to take effect, the resolution has to be read into the minutes tonight, and then motion second and a vote for approval. So we'll go ahead and have somebody read the informal resolution tonight. You can click on it
And that
it will
needs to
open.
be read in its
We're-
entirety.
We're going to read it in its entirety.
Okay. And does it matter who reads that?
It does not.
Does it have to
Well,
be the
whoever,
person that makes the
it
motion?
should be the person who makes the motion. Yes.
Okay. So one of you four will need to read that, please, if you are willing to make the motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the informal resolution as stated.
And you have to read it.
Yep.
Okay.
On October 18th, 2022, Tom Taylor filed formal complaint 22 FC 0114, alleging that the Sibley-Ocheyedan Community School Board violated Iowa Code Chapters 21 and 22 on October 18, 2022, referencing an October 17, 2022 board meeting. Mr. Taylor alleged that the board held a meeting without sufficient notice of an agenda item for review of the superintendent's contract. He alleged that during the meeting, some board members stated that more time was needed before voting on the issue. He added that when no motion was immediately made on the issue, the board president stated that he would step down as president so that he could make a motion. The board was notified of a complaint on October 20th, 2022. On October 25th, 2022, the board president replied to the complaint. He stated that the board packet was sent to the board members on October 14th, 2022. He noted that no motion to table the matter was made at the meeting. The agenda item was approved by the board, 4 in favor, 1 opposed. Another board member emailed IPIB stating that she received the board packet on October 14th, 2022, but did not have time to review the packet until Sunday, October 16th, 2022. She alleged that the public would not have known about the content of this agenda item because the agenda was vague. Legal counsel for the board provided a copy of the agenda and the meeting minutes for the Monday, October 17th, 2022 board meeting. Counsel stated that the 2-page agenda was posted online at 3:16 p.m. and then immediately printed and taped to the window of the hallway outside the superintendent's office. It was posted in the time to go from the copier to the window, so 3:17 to 3:18 p.m. on the window. October 14th, 2022 was the Friday prior to the Monday board meeting. The agenda included this item. F, consider contract extension. There is no indication whose contract was under consideration for extension. The school district has a website. The agenda and the minutes were posted on the website. The website has additional information about the agenda item. Quick summary, abstract, the board of directors and Superintendent Craig have requested extension of superintendent's contract through June 30th, 2024. This was more descriptive. Iowa Code Section 21.4 provides the minimum requirements for proper posting of a notice and agenda of an open meeting. While the use of the website to provide information about board meeting is laudable, it is required that adequate notice be posted at least 24 hours in advance of a meeting at a location easily acceptable to the public. The agenda items must be described in such a way as to appraise the public of that information. If a board member questioned what the agenda item was, even after reviewing the meeting materials, it is likely that the public was even less informed. No allegations were made concerning any violation of Iowa Code Chapter 22, Public Records Law. Iowa Code Section 23.8 requires that a complaint be within the IPIB's jurisdiction, appear legally sufficient, and could have merit before the IPIB accepts the complaint. On its face, this complaint meets the requirements for acceptance as to Iowa Code Chapter 21 only. The formal complaint was accepted by IPIB on November 17, 2022. Pursuant to the Iowa Code 23.9, the parties negotiated and reached an informal resolution. The parties agreed to the following terms. School board will acknowledge at the public meeting that the Sibley-Ocheyedan School Board posted an agenda for an open meeting on October 17, 2022 that included an item that was vague. The acknowledgement shall be recorded in the minutes of that said meeting. The board shall conduct training during an open meeting for all board members and administrative staff on Iowa Code Chapters 21 and 22 Sunshine Laws. The board may utilize the PowerPoint training available on the IPIB website. The board shall work with council and the Iowa Association of School Boards to provide training to the board and officials. The school board shall approve this resolution during an open meeting and include the full text of the meeting minutes of that said meeting. Said meeting shall be provided to the IPIB. The terms of this informal resolution will be completed within 60 days of acceptance of all parties. Upon showing proof of compliance, the IPIB shall dismiss this complaint as successfully resolved. This informal resolution has been reviewed and approved by the following.
Okay,
We need to second and vote.
and we would need a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve this informal resolution as Greg just read. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carried. All right, moving on to item B, consider approval of position on IHSAA football classification proposal.
So I received from the Iowa High School Athletic Association the information on the proposal. The classification changes based on socioeconomic status is the first step that they're taking. They don't feel like they've done anything to alleviate the concerns about football and the classes and trying to get rid of 85-0 games and all of that kind of thing. This is viewed as a good first step by the members of the board. It's going to affect, I think it's less than 30 school districts in the state to start with, but again, it's a step to help move people around. It will not affect Sibley-Ocheyedan. We will not go up or down based on this. So our principal and athletic director are in favor of the change. I would recommend that we vote in favor of making the change, but with the board's motion and second tonight, either needs to move to vote in favor of the change or to not vote in favor of making the change, and then I will make the vote accordingly based on that motion. So we are recommending that Sibley-Ocheyedan vote in favor of the change.
All right, any questions? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to to approve the IHSAA football classification proposal.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the proposal stated in the minutes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carried. Item C, consider approval of position on the IASB Director District 1 candidate.
So we have the two candidates that were presented, and you've had some time to consider, so I just need a candidate motioned and seconded and approved, and then I will cast the vote accordingly for the district.
Were you guys able to go on the IASB website and look at their qualifications? Okay. Any discussion?
They both look like pretty good candidates to me, so.
I've met both of them. I don't think we can go wrong either way.
No.
So I would entertain a motion to pick one of those individuals. Or I suppose we could vote, if you guys would like to do that. Highest vote would get it,
We could do a roll call.
or we could do a roll call. Thank you. How would you guys like to proceed?
Roll call is fine.
Roll call?
Sure.
Okay. Can I issue that roll call, or do you need to? Okay, let's do a roll call vote. Vote for either David from Storm Lake or Jared from Sioux Center. Laurel?
David Skipstead from Storm Lake.
Okay.
David.
Greg? David?
David.
Kristen?
David.
David? And I would also vote for David, so I would entertain a motion then to approve David for our vote for District 1 candidate for IASB.
I'll make a motion to approve David Skipstead for our vote. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve David Skibsted from Storm Lake for the position of District 1 candidate on the IASB Board of Directors. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carried. Consider approval of disposition and method of disposition of obsolete equipment.
Disposition. So food service has two ovens that have been replaced. One of the ovens is worth $1,500. The other one is depreciated out. Board policy allows you to approve garage sale, auction, or advertising in the newspaper. These are the only things we have that we're trying to move on right now. So garage sale seems a little cumbersome. The auction has a commission, and so in order to get the most out of the sale, we would recommend advertising in the newspaper, and then Carla, our Director of Food Service, is also going to post it in her Food Service Director chat group so that they can talk about it as well and know that it's out there. So I'd recommend directing Kendra to advertise the ovens for sale in the newspaper.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to direct Kendra to advertise the ovens for sale in the newspaper. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carried. Consider approval of at-risk dropout modified supplemental amount.
Every year you have to approve this application. This is like what we did last month for ESL and what was the other one? Not open enrollment out is what it was. The amount for fiscal year 24 is $254,229. Recommend approving the application, and please state the amount in your motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the at-risk dropout modified supplemental amount application in the amount of $254,229.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the at-risk dropout modified supplemental amount of $254,229. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carried. Consider approval of fund transfer.
We receive voted PEPAL money in the general fund instead of going directly to the PEPAL fund, so we have to transfer the dollars out of general fund into PEPAL. The amount of the transfer is $135,066.75. Would recommend approving the transfer, and again, please state the exact dollar amount in your motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the amount of $135,066.75 to be transferred into the PEPAL account from general fund.
Good. Was that a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the fund transfer of $135,066.75 from the general fund to the PEPAL account. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Consider approval of February meeting date change.
We've done this for the last several years because President's Day is the third Monday, and that's when the board meeting falls. So you'd have to approve moving the meeting with an affirmed motion and second. You'll want to check the dates you set in the work session to make sure that would work. But we would be scheduling the meeting then for Monday, February 13th at 5:30.
Will we have school this year with the snow days on President's Day?
You'll have to decide what you want to do, but there are no days built in. So until you decide what you want to, how much of the time you want to make up and where we want to put it, I can't answer that question.
So I guess if we had school that day, you probably wouldn't have to move the meeting, I guess. But it probably doesn't hurt. I mean, we've done the meeting in the past, so.
Would there be a motion?
I'll make a motion to move the meeting to Monday, February 13th at 5:30.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to move the February meeting date to February 13th, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. in the high school library. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same. Motion carried. Item H, there were none, correct?
Nope. That's correct.
And we will go to item I, consider approval of
And we
resignations.
have Katie Schroeder for 7th grade girls basketball coach and Valerie Van Rokel for food service. And recommend approving both resignations.
I move to approve the resignations as stated.
Second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the resignations as stated. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same. Motion carried. Consider approval of new contracts.
Lana Hibma moved back to town and would like her to return to being a paraeducator, and we are excited to have her back. So I would recommend that you approve her contract.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and, moved and seconded to approve the new contract for Lana Hibma as a paraeducator. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Item K, second reading of policies with changes.
Cindy, did you add this?
It is. We
Okay.
only did one. We did not waive the second reading last time.
Okay, so then we need to approve the second reading of the policies with changes as listed. I received no questions, so unless there are questions, I'd recommend approving the second reading.
Do we need to read each one of those policies in the motion?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve the second reading of policies with changes 401.14, 408.01, 602.01, 602.02, 602.03, 605.01, 605.01 R1, 605.02, 605.03, 605.3 R1, 605.03 E1, 605.03E2, 605.03E3, 605.04, and 605.05.
All right.
Second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the readings as Kristen stated. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same. Motion carried. Item L, second reading of new board policies.
This was only 605.03E4, and again, if there were no questions about this, I would recommend approving the second reading.
I'll make a motion to approve the second reading of new board policy 605.03E4.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the second reading of new board policy 605.03E4. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same. Motion carried. Additional items, next meetings.
They're listed there, January 16th, and then you approved changing the February meeting to February 13th, and March 20th coming up, so second semester.
All right, moving on to item 10, talking points.
I continue to be proud that we continue to meet the requests of the public and do more for the public. I'm very proud of that.
Thank you.
I'd like to mention the intervention going well,
22%.
going in the right direction.
And with everything going around right now, our attendance, I don't mean to jinx it, but it seems to be,
We've had one day in one building over 10%, and we've reported that to the state. Otherwise, as a district, we have not crossed that threshold.
my son in Marshalltown, they canceled Thursday and Friday classes last week because of over 25% of their students were out sick.
Yep.
So it's going around. Anything else? Any other talking points? I know it's been a long meeting and work session before that. I appreciate everybody coming and being involved. It's very important. All right, no other talking points. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sandra.
Is there, are you kids in choir? Okay, because they did choir first. Yeah.
Then I'm okay.
Choirs.
Then
They just finished this summer, mentioned that.
I don't have a choir, but they have a